Guys, it's amazing to have you both here to have this discussion because, you know, we can't talk about, you know, diversity and inclusion and change without, you know, talking about board level and executive leadership level and how that happens. So I'm going to kick off with you, Alistair, because it's, we want to hear your voice. We've just been regaled by Anita. What are the big challenges and how can we change it, and what are you seeing as regards, we'd say, the board level and that pipeline up to the board?
So I might take it from a global point of view, because what I heard you say, I would agree with totally. I think there's an Irish dimension to this, which is a unique, or there's an aspect of being a unique, smaller country where we could move things quicker. And then there's a very global dimension. So, you know, the famous mantra, you can't be what you can't see. So how many women do you really see in board positions? And then how much tokenism? And I'll say what comes straight into my mind, will come straight out my mouth. How much tokenism is there? So I think the only way you solve this, well, you've got to have an aspect of pipeline, which is a dreadful term, it's another sales term. You've got to have a level of pipeline where you see people at a certain stage in their career, men and women, and you pull them through. And I worry that there's as I approach my dotage, I worry there's a 55 plus tick box that starts the discussion, rather than what I've seen our organization do, where a number of women and men became board members in their early 40s. And reach down is a dreadful term, sorry. Reach over, I don't care, reach, grab and bring people through. And then there's the other piece, which is, oh heavens, you couldn't possibly do a board level if you haven't done a P&L, you know, profit and loss, you haven't run a business. Heaven help you, you must be moribund if you haven't run a P&L. Actually, I don't think that's the case. And then the final piece, I think you have to get mentorship in place very early, because superstars don't appear in their 50s.
Well said.
You can see them miles away.
Well said.
I couldn't agree more, and I do think that age thing is amazing, and it's for me, it's why you're so iconic as well, Anita. I mean, it's amazing.
That's a tough word.
I know, and I'm really sorry to be fangirling here, but I don't do it that often, I promise. But it is
really
incredible
wish my mother
because
was here.
yeah, I know it is a pity, but we'll show her the video after.
She's minding Rosie, so.
Well, there you go. But, I mean, what age were you when you first were on a public board, for example?
I think when I was first recruited, I was 37, going on 38. And Alistair makes all of the right points about that, is that, you know, the problem with the situation for boards in particular is that most boards insist on two things, right? One is that you have to be a sitting or current CEO or have that P&L experience. And the second is that you have to have prior board experience. So those two things do a lot to kind of wipe out the pool of potential women. So I was very fortunate at Symantec that they were willing to firstly drop those two criteria, because you know what they did? Like, kind of quite clever. They looked around the room and they said, of the 9 of us on this board, all of us are former or sitting CEOs, with the exception of one guy who was a former CFO. And guess what? All of us have prior board experience, so we don't really need another director with those two criteria. What we do need is a director that brings the voice of the customer, or a director, and they were solving specifically for age diversity. So I really commend them for you know, taking that approach. But the second thing they did, which was very unusual but is now becoming more of a practice, is that they hired a specialist recruiting firm. And this recruiting firm only does board searches, and only when they're looking for a female director. So the theory is that it's not a supply-side problem, that with the right specs, there are ample amounts of, you know, adequately, very well qualified, in fact, women ready to sit on boards. So she says, look, let me present a slate of just female candidates. And if you can't find an outstanding director among this slate, I will by all means expand the slate to include men. So now she's filled 50 board seats, and I think 97% of them have been women, and only 2 of them were current or former CEOs. Wow. And the other thing that's highly unusual is that 90% of them were known to nobody on the boards that they joined. And that's the other part of the problem, that most board recruiting is done from the networks of current boards. So that kind of perpetuates the issue.
And how important is that we widen that net, Alistair? Because that's the thing that drives me nuts as well. For example, if you look at a small country like Ireland, I mean, I could name on two hands, maybe, the women who are on every single board. It's like, you know, there is, and to me that starts to fall into tokenism as well, where it's like, oh, that woman has board experience and we need to fit, you know, to tick that box. Like, how have you thought about, you know, in the organization, how do you widen that net? And not just women, by the way, but, you know, that as we're talking about diversity of age, you know, diversity of background, diversity of ethnicity, whatever it may be. I mean, have you thoughts about that?
Other than just, I think it is more difficult in Ireland, but I think there's two challenges really. Some boards require 20 to 30 days a year of your time. Some boards, particularly in certain industries that are heavily regulated. So that's a problem. But and this is no ways to diminish a board level position, but you can be a board member of a charity in your 20s. And that's not I don't mean this to sound like one versus another, but sitting on a board it's not like a Mystic Meg. Sitting on a board and giving your views and input, it isn't something that just alights on a small number. So the sooner you start, the better. And I think we've got to move very, very quickly to get the board thing into people's mindsets in their late 20s, early 30s. And I'm being ageist already. But the sooner you get involved and you see the discourse and you understand the obligations, which are quite significant under some Companies Acts, but once you get your head around it, being a board member is different. You know more about this than I do. But being different to being an executive, but the sooner you get sort of immersed in it and the mindset, the sooner you learn.
Yeah. And I think, Alistair, if I'm correct, with some of the women that I've come across on boards are senior executives at Accenture. So this is sort of more back to your global point. And I think it's very empowering. I think it's very important that Accenture allows and encourages their senior executives, male and female, to potentially go and get some board experience, maybe sit on one external board when they're still in their operating roles. Because I certainly felt that if I had been on a board when I was in my operating role, I would have been far more effective. Because you're putting presentations together for the board, and you are trying to think what the board will, whether they'll approve your strategy. So that if you had been in the boardroom and you had that vantage point and you brought that back to your role, I think it makes people far more effective operating executives, and I think it's a great developmental opportunity for some of the, obviously more senior people.
I love that idea, actually, and how challenging is that, though, with the number of days required? That idea of freeing somebody up to maybe, can you imagine the experience they're bringing back to the organization as well? How feasible is that, though?
I think it depends, right? I think it depends on the geography is a big factor if you don't have to travel to the board meetings if they're local. And then it just depends on the size of the company, the industry that they're in, because banks are notorious. They have 11 or 12 meetings a year and all these various subcommittees and everything. So it is a different workload, but I think it's very doable.
And have you seen technology change that in any way? Are there people who are now doing virtual board meetings? Well, is that just not feasible?
It just depends on the organization and the restrictions placed upon you. But yes, you have to obviously attend in person for certain numbers of board meetings in certain jurisdictions, but there's nothing to stop you dialing into the strategy session, which may not be a formal board meeting. I think you can come up with any number of barriers. Right. It's like, oh, you couldn't do that. Or it's like the voice, it's my mother on my shoulder. My late mother is on my shoulder saying, what are you talking about? Who put you on stage? I can hear it right now. But that's life. She's there all the time. Thank goodness she's there, because otherwise I really could say anything. But you just have to be we need a mindset change. And I say that because I went through it about 14 years ago, when we talked about the fact that we were losing brilliant women that were coming up to a certain point in their career. Not marriage, not having children. It wasn't. The point was they reached a point where they went, I don't see anybody up there. The rarefied whatevers. So you need to get a mindset shift in, and I think there's a mindset shift required on the female side as people come through, which is you can be who you are and you can be as good as you are. Living that is, I'm not allowed to swear, living that is blooming tough. But you need a huge mindset shift on the male side in our organization, because it's a chronic problem. This is a daily, weekly, monthly problem, because you take your eye off it. We revert back to some of our older behaviors, as you talked about. Sorry, I'm wittering.
No,
you're dead right.
On the contrary, you're dead right, I agree. And do you think, is it something that both of you come across, is there still a lot of resistance? Genuinely.
You know what I think.
I resist it every day. Every day I get, yes, of course there is. of course, that we wouldn't be in the position we're in if there wasn't resistance. So, you know, it's not a case of resistance is futile, get out of the way. I think the resistance, I have a very strong point of view on quotas, as you know, Anne, in that I think you need targets and you need clarity of thought, and if you don't get the mindset shift, you change some things. The quota thing, I think I'm going to get lynched as I leave the building, I'm sure, by some people, but on the quota thing, I think that's not the way to go about it. The way to go about it is encourage. I use the orange-coloured stick. You know, it's not a carrot or a stick. You need an orange-coloured stick. That helps people to understand, if you don't do it, we've got to do it, because you can't run a business. In our shop, you can't run the shop without the front of house and the back of house being diverse, right? But I really think you need a massive mindset shift to make progress. And then if the mindset shift doesn't, like the old song, a little less conversation, a little more action, we've kind of had the conversation. We need to get on with the action.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, but the mindset shift just, you know, sometimes it sort of hits you in the face as well. Like, I was in one of my boards, and we had not had a discussion about diversity in the company at the board. And, you know, when you're in Silicon Valley, you get asked a lot, well, what percentage of women do you have in your, you know, in your companies? And so several of the directors had sort of made this comment and had requested this conversation. And one of the board members sort of piped up and said, well, like, you know, I'd be happy to put that on the agenda after somebody makes a business case for it. To which I replied, well, I'll be happy to do that after you make a business case for white men. Right? I mean, it's just...
There's nothing wrong with white men.
No, there's nothing. We love you, male, pale, and stale guys. But, you know...
That's it. That's the second one now in 2 days.
That's a micro behavior right there, forgive me. But you know, that's the mindset, right? I mean, we are so far past the conversation, as you say, Alistair. We're so far past this notion that you should have to make a business case for a cohort that are half of the population. And certainly in the United States, women have been graduated with more bachelor's and master's degrees than men for, you know, almost 20 years now. So this is a pipeline problem, right? A real one. And I think the other thing that is very important is that the conversation, as you rightly say, it has to be more holistic, right? And it's not just about men or women, it's about families, it's about ages and stages. It's a more holistic thing, because when you think about your customer base, right, you know, they don't check half of their personality at the door when they walk into, you know, your clients, or they walk into a store to buy something. So it always baffled me why we expected women to check half of their personalities at their door, half of their lives at the door when they came to work. So I think we're moving on from that. I think there's a lot more awareness about that. But we just have to be much more honestly open-minded about it and truthful about it, right? The reality is when you are having a family, your priorities do shift for a little while, right? But I think there needs to be more focus on the changing role of men, right? You know, I have gotten all these books for Rosie, and they're all about empowering women, right? Rosie Revere, the engineer, right? There's not a single book that describes a role model that's a wonderful stay-at-home dad and that builds a community or nurtures his children. And I want Rosie to read about those kind of role models. And I want those kind of male executives in companies to have that opportunity to have that flexibility as their lives and their priorities change as well. It's just too black and white right now.
The black and white kills me, and you're singing my song completely there, because it you know, some of my friends here will have heard me say this before, but I think it's terribly enslaving of men also. You know, this system where, you know, they're almost seen as not being ambitious if they care about their kids and, you know, want to leave at 5 o'clock or things like that. I mean, how do we change that mindset amongst, you know, sort of the management that are resistant to that idea, you know, that a guy has to be there till midnight, you know? I
might be wrong. Happens every day, for every
us.
hour, every day. But I think that starts very early in life, because your goals and your ambitions, you know, how many men, I have one boy and 2 girls. One of them studies, one of them doesn't study, the other 2 do. Guess which? But somewhere inside you, early on, you're told you'll be fine.
Yeah.
You're kind of a man. You look like a man. You might be pale. You're not stale yet, but you're pale and male. And you'd be grand.
No, you're dead right.
You've got to get to and there's a huge shift when you become a parent, I think, or when you're dealing with young folks. I think we need to get to the point where that starts in late primary, early secondary.
Absolutely.
It starts with the mindset at home, which is, How do
Absolutely.
you deal with them? And I'm lousy at it, right? I'm lousy at it because I'll fall into stereotypes. But at least you have enough people around you in your business life and in your home life that go, hold on.
Yep.
So
There's
I'm not sure it's
awareness
about
about it,
management.
right? No,
And
that's a really
maybe
good
I'm being
point,
picky.
I
I
think.
think it's about when
Yeah.
because when you show up for work and you're leading a team or you're preconditioned.
Yeah.
And uncoding that is blooming difficult. And I was
Really hard.
at least semi-uncoded a long while ago. So anyway.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, the gender stereotypes start from before you're born. I told my husband John that no child of mine was going to wear pink, and we knew we were having a girl. And
I love
the problem is, Anne, that the nursery is pink from ceiling to floor, and every stitch of clothes she has is pink. So I just, at some point you sort of give up because you realize you're against this massive tsunami of gender norms, right? But the point is that I think you can condition inside the home for things, right? I realized that when I was 13, I went to work with my dad one day, and he put up television aerials and satellite dishes, not the most glorious of work. And he allowed me to come to work with him, and that meant I would go into the attics, and I would kind of tinker with the wires, and he would tell me the signal was okay, or vice versa, and whatever. And there was one morning, it was pretty cold, and I was wearing a skull cap. And we had kind of finished the job, and we were standing in the hallway of this house, and this man said, "Oh, that's a grand chap you have there with you, Con," right? And Con is my father's name. And so I looked at my dad, and he looked at me, and we just kind of let it go, right? Now, a few things about that. One is it was back to that kind of, there are situations where you let it go because there's no malintent, and there's situations where you speak up. Yeah. But when I reflect on that story, like how open-minded was my father to take me to work when I was 13 and to allow me to crawl around in attics and tinker with televisions. And I knew how to solder and how to change a tire before I knew how to knit. Right? So we have to kind of, it has to be an and conversation. You have to teach your son how to knit and your daughter how to change a tire. You have to teach your son how to cook and your daughter how to solder, right? It just needs to be a more holistic, open-minded environment.
We've a lot of the maker community here as well, so the soldering, I think, got a particular piece of applause there, because I know lots of women out there who solder. I can see some of them down here. Hi, Katrina. We have to wrap up quite shortly, but tell me, in companies, even, before we ever get to board level, bringing people through of difference through leadership and through the, and I am going to use that awful word again because I can't think of another word for it, but that pipeline that comes up, that you would be offered maybe a role, or you might be headhunted by a recruiter to come onto a board, etc. I mean, how has Accenture managed to do it so well? Because in fairness, I think about 33% of your leadership roles, it might be more, your executive leadership roles are women.
34%, yeah.
It's unusually high for your sector. I think you'll agree. Like, have you lessons that you could share with us, things that have worked?
Mindset. And mindset changes very slowly, but you need incredible, clear, visible leadership from the top. So my predecessor was absolutely unequivocal in 2004. We need to stop losing our best talent. You then need rigor, which is a dreadful word, with a U, not an O. An O and a U. You need rigor around it in terms of, you've got to understand that different people have different moments in their lives when they need really careful leadership of how their career develops. And that probably starts relatively young. So you need a proper mentor, not somebody you go and talk to about when something goes right or wrong. So you need proper mentoring and a deep understanding of the moments in a person's career when they can't have work as their only priority. I'm not suggesting that's something we engender, but people can become incredibly focused. And when you're having a family, male or female, you need a way to manage that. Manage, even that's the crap word. But you need to be able to help people through the career, because you can see the talent early. Don't for a moment say the 50% of graduates that join us that are female are worse than the men by the time they age 27. So you need that. And you also need for people who have families, you need a very, very conscious, clear, deliberate approach to managing that period of life.
That's exactly right. Well
and
said.
that is unarguable.
Well said.
And can I ask you a slightly different question, Anita? For young women and men out there who may not fit the obvious criteria for, board leadership or leadership, but who are ambitious, do you have tips, on I don't want to say how to be successful because there's so many different ways of being successful, but but how to push yourself forward and forget about the barriers and yourself, just get yourself in the direction you want to go.
I think Alistair hit on one, and it's an overused word, but this idea of mentorship, right? And I have sort of a couple of thoughts on that. One is that I think mentors are like parents at work, right? They actually really do sort of parent you and help you, right? The second thing is that there's a real art to being a good mentee. You have to be willing to ask for help. You have to know that it's a sign of strength and not weakness to ask for help. And you have to be humble enough to take that help when you get it. And so I think that's really very important. I've had terrific mentors all throughout my career. But now I think about us as senior people. Like, we look at folks as we're doing CEO succession, and we look at certain candidates and say, well, he's never been or she's never been a CEO before. And you just go, guys, all of us at one point had never been a CEO before or a board member before or a VP before or whatever. And to me, when you take somebody with raw talent and you promote them into a role, it's incumbent on the senior people then to help them succeed in that role. To me, that's the difference between people that kind of make it and don't, that sometime along the way, there was somebody that was willing to invest their time and their capital and their wisdom in you to make sure that you succeeded. So it goes both ways.
I love it. I'm going to end on that note. Guys, thank you so much. What a really useful conversation to have. Thank you.